Today's webinar, Boost Freedom of Information Compliance Using SharePoint. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. And if we don't manage to answer your questions, someone will follow up with you shortly via email. We'll make a recording of the webcast available to you within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speakers, David Lavenda, Vice President of Product Strategy at Harmony, and John O'Reilly, CTO at StoneShare. David is a frequent contributor to leading press outlets on the topic of information overload in organizations, which is the focus of his research. David is an international scholar for the Society for the History of Technology. Since 2001, John has been helping customers to deliver high business value solutions in SharePoint. John has a strong focus on end users and a long track record of successfully delivering solutions with high user adoption. John is an accomplished public speaker and active in the Agile and Scrum communities. David, could you please get us started?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. Welcome everybody to today's webinar on freedom of information, boosting performance using SharePoint. So just to level set and get everyone on the same page, as I'm sure everybody's familiar with the requirements of freedom of information, it's basically we're talking about citizenry and activists, journalists, and civic organizations mostly looking for information from government organizations that have to be delivered within a fixed amount of time. And although we're probably all familiar with the general concept and the requirements, I'm not sure everyone has really considered how far-reaching the consequences can be. So just a few numbers here. Over 100 nations have freedom of information, some sort of legislation, all 50 states, all 13 Canadian provinces and territories, the UK and all the other European countries also have requirements that are very similar in the sense of what needs to be delivered. A lot of this has been historically paper. It's moving a lot more towards digital assets, is what we're going to talk a lot about today. And the requirements are only going to get tougher as time goes on. So this is not merely a technology story, although we will be focusing on somewhat on technology, also how we organize ourselves, and some best practices that we'll be sharing will help streamline the operations and get so we can be compliant with the requirements. Let's take a look at some of the risks associated with not being compliant. So a couple of surveys that were out there. The Knight Foundation did a survey. One of the numbers that came out was that 3 of 4, 75% of respondents felt it was taking too long to get responses from organizations, government organizations. And an open government survey found that over a third of respondents were denied information, not because they weren't, the information was excluded or exempted, but because it was unclear who held the records. Just poor record keeping and not really sure who had that information. And then 37% of respondents couldn't get records because they were not in a retrievable form. So there's a lot about just not being able to provide or fulfill the requirements that are required of us today. And while the consequences can be quite daunting. For the maybe in a best case scenario, we create a sense of suspicion when we're not able to come up with the necessary documents. At worst, it can become a public relations nightmare with great embarrassment for individuals and departments. Could be also personal risks involved in not being able to find the stuff and supply that. Interestingly enough, the Knight Foundation survey also found that 80% of respondents describe technology is at least part of the problem. So it's a huge amount of people who felt that the technology is an important element here that needs to be dealt with today. The other survey, the Open Government Survey, summarized their findings as follows. Much of this challenge is coming from new digital forms of public records and how they're being created, classified, and retrieved. So there's clearly a focus, certainly on things that are coming along with email requirements, and we'll look a little bit at email as well, in addition to documents. Of course, email, are documents today. So the requirements for being able to comply with the fulfillment of supplying the freedom of information for those, the risks are really high, and again, they're going to get higher. So, what do we do? All right, so we've got a problem. We understand technology is a problem. We understand that the new documents in digital form are a problem. Well, we've got at least three options. One of them is work harder, but the answer to that is, really? I mean, aren't we working harder enough, and haven't we heard that before? Is that really a solution? So sometimes we hear that from people who say, just work harder to get those documents out. Then there's another option: we can hire more people, but really throw more people at the problem. For how many people is that an option? How many people have budgets for that? And at the end of the day, is that really the right way to do things today? And the third answer that's often given is work smarter, which is a wildly annoying suggestion because it presumes we're not working smart today, and that's probably not true, at least for most of us. But the question here about working smarter really does have some value to it, in the sense that let's look at how we can leverage our existing investments in technology, specifically SharePoint. How can we invest in what we've already invested in to get out of that technology what we hope to get from the beginning? So, we've invested, all of us invested in SharePoint, and had expectations that this would be a part of the solution, but probably aren't aware of how much SharePoint can really help solve this problem. And that's what John and I are here today to do, is to actually share some of this information. John will show a very nice walkthrough of a real-life scenario exactly of how SharePoint, and together with Harmony, can solve the freedom of information compliance requirements in a very practical and pragmatic fashion. Maybe just a few words. What are the barriers? I mean, what are the barriers that are associated with being compliant? Well, first of all, there's a question about information in general, and this we won't talk about too much today, but there is certainly a part of understanding what needs to be saved. People have to be educated on what needs to be what constitutes a record. How long do these things need to be saved for? What information has to be redacted before it can be given out? So these are issues that are internal best practices issues that need to be dealt with. Certainly you don't want to keep things longer than you have to. That creates a liability for the organization and creates a lot of clutter, to say the least. What we will be focusing on today is some of the other barriers, which are really the two types of documents that fit into the freedom of information story. One of them is emails. So, today emails are really a document. It's almost absurd to think that emails should sit in an inbox while a document sits in a central repository for documents. When emails contain things like contracts, they may contain proposals, they may request agreements to terms of a contract. So it doesn't make sense that those sit elsewhere than documents. So emails and documents, really, from our perspective, as people associated with freedom of information, really constitute one and the same from a storage and retrieval perspective, and we'll look at that in detail. And there's some questions associated with emails as well, like what constitutes a personal email? Well, again, what would you need to capture? One of the difficulties from a technical standpoint is being able to find emails when they're locked in people's individual inbox. And this goes back again to the point I'm talking about. If an email might be communication between a government agency, a journalist or an activist may want to understand how city decisions or county or state decisions or provincial decisions were made, or county council decisions were made. That is a document, and finding that in individual inboxes, who took care of that? Whose inbox should I even be looking in? How am I going to find those emails? It's really a nightmare just to think about that. And then documents. Documents, people want to see things like the final results of a project, read meeting minutes, access internal memos. Who owns those documents? Who edited them? Who's responsible for them? Where do I go to find information about a document if I'm requested to do so? So a lot of these same issues come up about how do I store that information in a way that becomes both readily accessible by the compliance people who need to supply these answers, as well as being able to find them, not only being able to access them technically. So these are all business challenges that are associated with the technology infrastructure, and let's look at how we can get them to work better together. So before we do that, just let's take a very quick look at what a typical process that we're talking about in this webinar will look like, and John will actually walk us through one of these processes, actually using Harmony and SharePoint and Outlook, and we can see what this looks like in practice. But just to set the level so that everybody's on the same page. Typically, a staff member will receive a request for information, acknowledge that through an email, then go back and collect the requested data from colleagues. So collecting the emails, the documents, maybe the paper documents. Then assign individuals to do searches across the different databases and the content storage locations. The more places that the information is stored, the more complicated the story becomes, and the more difficult it is to be compliant. And SharePoint actually here provides a common infrastructure that allows us to aggregate different types of content into a single place where it can be both cataloged properly and searched and found very easily, reducing this step by quite a bit. The next step 4, getting access to the missing information. So once we've located it, actually accessing the information, then deciding what can be released, what needs to be redacted, how that information should be distributed, and then, of course, compiling all that information together and sending the answer to the requester, and then closing this case. Really, it's like managing a case. So this is the way we look at it, and this is the way you'll see as we organize it in this fashion, but it's a best practice to be able to organize it and solve the problems this way. So maybe just a few words, again, before we get to the demo where we'll actually spend the bulk of the time actually looking at this in practice. Maybe just a few minutes about what the problems with the process, some of the major problems today that we all suffer from, and then we'll look at how we solve these in practice. So one is the manual processing of emails. Everyone knows that if you rely on people to make on a daily basis to process these, it's just a enormous opening for mistakes and errors, as people just either don't take care of things, they drop the ball, they don't respond properly. The information, again, because it's locked in people's inboxes, there's no visibility to other people on the team as to what's been done or what hasn't been done, and that creates an enormous problem. One of the common methods that's used in many places is to send mails to joint mailboxes or use distribution lists. These are just a recipe for disaster. Things get dropped. Somebody assumes that somebody else is going to be taking care of an email request or email message. The old rule about when two people are responsible for a task, nobody is responsible for the task. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And 3, the search for information is almost entirely manual. When things are not classified properly, if you just stuff emails into an inbox, or even if you do just stuff them into SharePoint, how do you find them? I mean, there's lots of text there. There's no real way to locate what you're looking for. And then you just have this massive problem of slogging through lots of manually looking for stuff. Same for documents. When information is not properly classified, it's almost impossible to find. It becomes just like a document graveyard. And because all these other manual processes are going on, work often gets dropped because people are overwhelmed. They just can't keep up with all the requirements. This is very tedious type work sometimes when things are not organized properly. And at the end of the day, not being compliant, again, creates that PR nightmare, or even worse, if people are affected by not being compliant, they may actually lose their job by not being able to fulfill the legislative requirements. So let's look at the solution that we propose. A couple of these are associated with business practices, and some of them are associated with the technology. Let's start with maybe the overall arching theme, which is simplify best practices. I think simplifying, making things easy, what we say, making the right thing the easy thing to do, is the key to being successful, because the more complicated a process is, the less likely it's going to be done efficiently and properly. So, in an ideal world, all the information would be stored in a central location. That's certainly a best practice. SharePoint represents a tremendous opportunity to do that, and we all have that, so that seems to be the right place to do that. Of course, regular training and reminders to the staff, people getting clear instructions, these almost go without saying, as these are very good best practices. Not every email or document needs to be stored, and helping people recognize what might become later a subject of a Freedom of Information request, how to store it in the right location, and how to classify it properly is very important out of the gate. And in order to be able to do that, here's where some tools come in. So the second step in focusing on the simplifying the information capture. So once we identify something that needs to be kept, how do we do that in a way that's both very simple and also captures the proper classification so that we can find it later? So at Harmony, we like to say that we like to make the right thing the easy thing to do. And because people spend their day in email, it seems a natural place to not only obviously capture emails, but also capture documents by doing simple things like drag and drop emails and documents to SharePoint, capturing the metadata, the classification process, making that automatic by capturing the email and metadata directly from the email headers, and also I'll be showing later on some really new clever ways to use artificial intelligence actually to automatically classify emails, which is a fantastic new feature. This is the first time today that we'll be showing that, so be sure to stick around for that. Automation, certainly one of the ways to simplify things is to automate them, and there's some really clever things that you can do today through SharePoint workflows. Certainly email rules, John will be showing a bit later on how you can actually create automated email rules that will identify important email records, automatically upload them, and classify them into SharePoint, and make that a no-touch process, thereby solving one of the biggest problems is if you can't produce documents and emails that you don't capture. So doing that automatically to make that process really simple and automatic. Of course, if you classify things properly, you can find them very easily later on, and that's where the big payoff comes. So you want to be sure that you classify the information, and again, by automating this as much as possible is great. So if you can, for example, when you upload a document, prompting, this is what Harmony does, prompts people to be able to supply metadata both for documents and emails so that they become classified properly. And this semi-automatic process it goes a long way to solve the big problem of being able to find the information later on, and it's really simple to do. You don't require people to do 8 steps to be compliant with what you want them to do. So if you follow all these steps, and it's really simple to see how these work, you can be compliant very, very easily. And those are a lot of words about what you can do, but there's nothing more, as I say, a picture tells 1,000 words. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John from StoneShare, who will not only show you, but explain exactly every step of the process, and so you can see for yourself how really simple this whole process can be.
All right, thanks, David, and thanks everyone for joining. We'll switch over to my screen here. Hopefully that's showing up for you right now. Good. So just a bit about me. I'm John O'Reilly. I work for a company called StoneShare. It's a system integrator. We do for the last 10 years, all day long SharePoint, nothing but SharePoint, all day, every day. And the great majority of what we do are document records management systems in SharePoint. And in that time, we've used a lot of different products, SharePoint products, add-ins, and Harmony, in our opinion, is one of the best in terms of both the product itself as well as the support that our customers get from the vendor. We currently recommend it on literally every engagement. And here's why. When we talk about document management, most organizations face some key issues, right? As David was talking about. First and foremost, being able to find documents when you need them, right? Whether that's for e-discovery or freedom of information or some other purpose, reducing duplication of those documents, just reducing the fact of reproducing those documents because you can't find them, reducing the amount of duplicates that are sent around in email as attachments, which then results in, me merging them back again when I get agenda_John_July 25th version, right? Even trying to find the latest version or trying to find the latest copy of the contract when someone's on holiday, right? And then of course that massive and growing file share full of stale content where you can't find what you're looking for, IT doesn't like it because of the cost, and compliance has an issue because you don't even know if you're meeting your legal obligations. So enter SharePoint, right? It's a document management system which can address all these problems. But with all DEM, document management systems, there's like a fundamental problem of user engagement. Because if the system is not really, really easy and engaging for the end users, giving them real value in their normal daily work, people just won't put their content in. And you can have an excellent system that does a great job of managing the 4 test documents you put in on the first day, right? So let me show you what I mean. What you see in front of you here, and you've been looking at, is a document management system configured in SharePoint. And it does records management, it does freedom of information, e-discovery, among other things, right? Trouble though is that even the people in the audience here who are probably familiar with SharePoint may still take some time to get used to what you're doing, right? It may need some training to understand what's available here, what you can work on. And it's not necessarily just obvious how to navigate or use it. And this creates a barrier to adoption. And fundamentally, as well, this is a web-based interface that for many people is not a natural way to collaborate. It's an interruption. I have to leave my email and think about where to go next. Because we all talk about, when we talk about collaboration in general, and e-discovery in particular, for most people, this starts and ends in email. It's the one system that's shared by everybody. You're communicating with private citizens, third parties, with other departments and agencies that may not be on your network. So this is where Harmony comes in. If we look at SharePoint, we have in here a library for tracking our freedom of information requests, right? Let me show you the same system, but in a slightly more familiar interface. I have in front of me Outlook. This is something that everyone understands. People use it on a daily basis. We manage most of your tasks out of Outlook. And I have here my favorites, again, the same library with the same information and content in it, right here in a natural interface that I naturally and instinctively as an end user know how to use. And by bringing this SharePoint into Outlook, I allow IT, and I allow the information management group to support the normal working processes with some compliance and some rigor that comes from having an industrial document records management system under the covers. All right. And by the way, with virtually no training. Right. So if we talk about freedom of information and the sort of process, as David was mentioning, it normally starts with either a form that was submitted by on the website, or something somebody downloaded and sent in, maybe by a letter that gets scanned in, or an email request or telephone request. But in all those cases, normally it's going to work its way around to someone who's responsible for managing these requests, usually as an email. So you can see here in my inbox, I've got one email sitting in front of me. That email is a freedom of information request with a document attached to it. I can have a look at the attachment if I choose to see what we're asking for. And it's a person who's a constituent who's interested in finding out information about them or about their property, right? Now, as David mentioned, one of the key things that Harmony lets me do is for those emails that I think are important, there's lots of different ways to do this, but those emails that I think are important, I can bring them directly into SharePoint, and it's as easy as drag and drop. All right, I can bring in that email. You can see it here now. I can also, if I choose, bring in just the attachment, if that's what I want to share with my colleagues, right? So I can keep track of both the conversation as well as separately keep track of those documents. Now this is in SharePoint, right? It has all the version history and properties and versioning and check-in, check-out that you would expect from SharePoint in terms of being able to control those documents, and I have access right here inside my Outlook interface, right? If I look at this document, sorry, the email that I brought in, and look at those SharePoint properties, you can see that first and foremost, because of what we're doing and where we are, we've been able to tag this with a content type that links to our compliance. I know that this is a public disclosure request or freedom of info request, depending on which legislation you're looking at. It has different names. And that's going to allow me to attach a retention schedule to it. So I know I'm going to retain it for the appropriate amount of time. I'm going to dispose it at the appropriate amount of time as well. We can also see that a lot of the metadata, even though there's a long list here, a lot of this is filled in for me already, right? A name for the document based on the email. I've got who it was to. I've got any CC or BCC items, the date of the email, the from, and I've got the subject. All document information and metadata that's extracted automatically by Harmony and applied to that document when it comes into the system. So one of the key things with document records management, we love to use metadata to track information and be able to find it again, but end users absolutely abhor entering this. And you'll notice that I dragged that across. I didn't get prompted with a screen. If you don't want to, it can be configured that way if you want, if you prefer, if you have some compliance requirements that need that. But we can set it up so just drag it across. So for the end user, it's a completely transparent thing. I drop it in there. All my metadata gets set without having to do anything. Anything that's context dependent can set automatically, right? And I have already become significantly more compliant. The goal here is to try and give value to the end user to make it easier, like David said, to do the right thing. Within this SharePoint interface, I have access to my standard functionality. In this case, I'm going to create a new document set to represent this case because I'm going to probably get some help to work on this freedom of information request. I know it's from John O'Reilly. And I can do just normal things that you would expect to be able to do, which I can cut and copy these documents. I'm going to move these ones in here into the new case. I can see them in there, fantastic, right? I also have, if you'll notice at the top here, a really nice feature. I can use all of my views from SharePoint. So the ones that are configured in SharePoint, I can use to filter out cases that are closed. I can use it to filter out cases that are not yet being worked on, and I can use it to, for instance, show different views. If I only want to see the emails, I can do that as well. So whatever views are set up in SharePoint, I can reflect them here through Harmony. It's really, really a convenient feature. Another feature that we like to use in SharePoint, right, that's reflected here through Harmony, is the ability to set metadata at the document set level and have that propagate to all the documents and emails that get created in there. So by setting this again one time, I'm going to be able to propagate all these email or metadata fields to all the documents inside, and that's going to have a couple of really nice benefits for me. Fill in today's date, the year 2017, so that we can get that nice view populated correctly. And then as an address, I'm going to say number 2 Street. I get that from the request in Springfield. All right. Fantastic. Now, any documents that I add in here or created in here or move in here are going to inherit all that metadata. So even though we can't always completely automate that, at least I can bring it to the point where a user enters it one time and they get the benefit of that going forward. So having got this request, the first thing that I'm going to normally do is create an acknowledgement letter. back to the constituent. And there's another really nice feature of Harmony is it allows me to use the SharePoint templates. So by creating, again, context-aware templates based on that content type that's linked through to records management, I can open up a new document in the right location with the right template. So this has some great benefits in terms of making sure that everyone's on the latest template, but you'll notice it's not just about the benefit to the organization, but the benefit to the end user. You'll notice this document here has a number of fields that are already filled in. It already has the requester, right? The letter is dated. We have it set to the location where it's going, the address that we typed in previously, and then we've also put in the request ID that the constituent can use for reference later on. So these properties that are in here are all connected through to SharePoint. If I set them in the document, they're going to be reflected in SharePoint. If I set them in Harmony, they're going to be reflected in the document and in SharePoint. It's all a fully integrated and connected experience for the end user, which, by the way, is just a natural way to work. I create this, fantastic. I can close it. And Harmony does a couple of other nice things here as well. You'll notice it's checked in the document by default for me, which is great, which means it's ready to share. If I want to share this with another person, I can use my, SharePoint's sharing features as well, straight from this interface. So the first thing I do maybe is to create that letter of acknowledgement. I'm going to send that out to the end user. The next thing I'm probably going to do here is enlist the help of some of my colleagues. To get the information from their department, which is related to this request. As part of that, you'll notice I have this, because I did a forward, that one's in there. Let's delete this for a second. I'm going to be able to now, again, if I have documents in SharePoint that I can see through Harmony, I can just drag them right into the email. Right? It's a natural thing. It's an easy thing. It's something that the end users will expect, but it's something that is not necessarily, it's been a challenge up until now. If you want to do this from SharePoint, you have to download it to your desktop. You have to go through a significant amount of hassle to make that work. But here we have it, drag and drop right in there. So I can put in either the original email or the document. They both come in. Now, one thing you'll notice here is that we've, by default, included them as links, right? This is a way that we can encourage best practice from end users by default, right? There's nothing that prevents me from, if I choose to, copying this in and pasting it into my email. So I need that if I'm going to send my email, for instance, to someone outside the organization who wouldn't have access. But by default, it gives me that links. Again, bringing people back to the official one single source of truth, which is going to be in SharePoint, so that when somebody then opens one of those documents, they're going to be working on the master copy. And I don't have that nightmare around constantly merging changes from different people. This is another really nice feature of Harmony. And this is, again, these are all configurable. You can turn these on or off. But in this case, I've asked it to prompt me if I ever send any attachments, whether or not I want to save those to SharePoint. So since I'm working on a conversation here that's been tracked in SharePoint, it's going to ask me if I want to save the email. It's also going to ask me if I want to save the document that I've included as an attachment. And then there's a really nice one down here as well, which says replace attachments with links. So by default, again, if I'm sending this to someone internal to my organization, it can by default save that attachment to SharePoint, replace it with a link so that when the person receives that email, they click on the link, they get to the latest version automatically. So again, encouraging best practices in information management, but without being necessarily too intrusive about it, which we really like. There's another one here, which is whether or not we want to delete the email after saving it to SharePoint. And this is a common option for the different Harmony features, is depending on how you want to approach email, you may decide that you prefer to have those emails that are saved in Harmony only in Harmony and not in people's inboxes as well. All right. So we've sent that one off to one of our colleagues who's going to hopefully, execute on that and come back to us. In terms of actually executing on that request, there's a couple of really nice things in Harmony. One of them, which we can see here, is I can do a search. You'll notice there's a search there. I can search right from within the Harmony interface, and it does a SharePoint search for me, right? So I can see anything within that Freedom of Information or Public Disclosure Request library. It's going to get me my response, and in terms of the search criteria there. I can also, if I choose, search a whole site or my entire farm. I can search all in one go from within Harmony. So this is a really nice way for people to be able to search and find those documents. Again, one of the biggest problems with documents and document management is the amount of time that people spend recreating documents that already exist. I've seen some incredible statistics on that. If you can at least get people to find those documents, then you're not creating them over and over again, sometimes with different names, and sometimes it's very hard to find that they are duplicate information, right? So I have here some results, which is great. I might get an email back from a colleague which has their results as well, right? Which I may want to include back in my case. So I get an email back from my colleague. Again, as before, I may want to include the whole email or just the documents, which they might send me on redacted versions, for instance, or they might save them directly in there. If it's somebody who happens not to have access to SharePoint, then they can send them to me this way. Again, I'm tracking the whole conversation, and I'm tracking the whole interaction with the constituent here in SharePoint, so that if it comes to a question later on, we can walk through the whole process one by one, exact dates, exact times, exact versions, which is fantastic. Another really nice feature that I have with Harmony is that right now you'll see I kind of manually dragging emails in. I can also use Outlook rules to automatically move messages to Harmony or to SharePoint through Harmony. So in this case, I have a results of Freedom of Information request as a subject, right? And I can move it to a mapped folder. So one of the things that Harmony allows you to do is map a folder into Outlook. I can move it into there, and I can set up a rule that will take anything from this conversation going forward and automatically ship those into SharePoint via that mapped folder, which is again a really nice feature that we like to use and recommend to our customers to use. Last thing we normally do here for one of our constituents would be to create a response letter. And depending on what we've been working on, there may be some explanation required. There may be an inventory of documents that we're going to respond with. There may be some redacted versions, but fundamentally there's going to be also some communication that we'll create. You'll notice again all those fields are filled in on my behalf with that template, and I can create a response back to my original request if I choose, saying, for instance, please send to the constituent. Okay. Fantastic. Once we've done this and I send this off, I can now go back to Harmony. Say no. And I can, for that new case that I've created, just close the case. This is going to be an indication to me through my view that the case is no longer open. So if I'm looking at my open cases, I no longer see that case. It's gone. It's also going to be an indication to my records management software that the case, the actual Freedom of Information case is closed, and that all the related information can be archived into like a retention and disposition cycle. Okay. We've seen some nice features there. There are a couple things that we haven't shown here, which are also really relevant. The first one is that Harmony do have mobile applications. So the same convenience you can get here through Outlook, you can get through a slightly different experience. You have access to SharePoint on your mobile devices, which is fantastic. And also, freedom of information is a great example of something that lends itself well to automation through workflow. And if you implement SharePoint workflows, all of those are also work correctly when accessed through the Harmony interface. So we've done a lot through Harmony. I think we intended to show that by using Harmony we can augment an end user's experience and their capabilities in document records management with SharePoint in a natural way that makes it easy to use and easy for them to engage with really very, very minor training. The only other thing I would mention is that while we've been working in Outlook, Harmony still has great links back to SharePoint. If I wanted to, at any point in time, from let's say if I did want to do a more advanced e-discovery search, I can always open in browser directly from within ShareGate, and that will take me right back to SharePoint, where I can do, maybe a more advanced query with Boolean logic and put in my, main and street and John and all right, I can see my results there. So I have that link back to SharePoint if I want to do something a little bit more engaging. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm gonna hand it back over to Susan now to take questions from the audience.
Great, thank you, John. If you would like a complimentary 30-minute evaluation with a collaboration expert, please answer the question on your screen. And while you're answering the questions, we will start asking the questions that have come in. So let me see. John, if I use the email rules that you showed, am I copying the mail into SharePoint or am I moving it?
Yeah, you have two options there. So when you use a normal Outlook rule, I can choose if I want to move the email or copy it when I set up the rule. So if I check my rules here, and I change the rule. So I'm going to say here I'm going to move it. That's the nature of the rule, but I don't have to move it. I could copy it if I choose. I also have the option.
Need to show your screen, please?
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Sorry about that.
There we go.
So I can see my rule here. So in the definition of the rule right here, it says to move it, but I can change to a different kind of rule. So any rule that's available in Outlook, I can follow that rule, whether it's copying or moving.
Great, thank you. I think this is also for you, John. What you talked about, what is your implementation process? That is, like, how do you roll this out to your customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we normally do is we engage with our customers on a multi-stage process. The first stage of which is usually a pilot engagement with a small group of users, where we want to bring in like a highly pre-configured solution, which we've used on a number of times, a number of different engagements. It meets the most common requirements. We work with the customer to get that up and running for a small number of users. Let's say 20 to 50 or up to 100 users, get them working and running with that, understand the implementation in that organization and the requirements there, and then work on some of the more advanced features, both in terms of rolling out to additional users, but also incorporating things like workflow or integrations or any customizations or additional work they need to do. The initial pilot is normally a fairly short engagement. It's down to between 6 months now is usually a good measuring stick, kind of start to finish for that first stage.
Great, thank you. How can I try out some of these features that you showed? David, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so if you go to the Harmony website, you can just click on the IT eval, the evaluation. We can set you up with a fully functional license to try out all the things that John was showing.
Great. And the next question I see, can you cover what metadata Harmony captures? David, why don't you share your screen and you can show us?
Yeah. So John showed some really good examples of how to capture emails and documents. But one of the really nice new features that we have takes advantage of some of our Harmony's new artificial intelligence capabilities in the form of natural language processing to not only capture the email headers, as John showed before, but also to actually do a content analysis of the email message, extract topics from the unstructured portion of the email, the actual text of the email, and then assign that metadata. So I'm going to show you how this works briefly. I have an email here. I'm just going to drag it over to the Harmony window as John showed before. And when this is configured, what you'll see is that the email message itself will inherit the metadata with the topic. So you'll see here the email message here. It says this correspondence is follow-up to this FOI request for the Omega contract from the Praxis Corporation. These were picked up as topics automatically by Harmony. So you see Omega, Freedom of Information, Praxis Corporation, and the request number, and assigned metadata so that now you'll be able to do a search on these without having to, not only do we capture this automatically, but the individuals don't even have to be aware. This is a completely transparent process that works behind the scenes. Again, taking advantage of some of our new artificial intelligence capabilities, using our new collage technology that brings this, makes this available. This is very exciting stuff, and it's available to users.
Thank you, David. So can you summarize how Harmony helps government organizations meet their Freedom of Information compliance? John?
Yeah, thanks. So I think with different government organizations, there's going to be different laws and legal obligations that apply. The main thing that's is common across most of them is, first of all, to have a defined process. The second of all, to make sure you're meeting your obligations in terms of timings. So there's normally a tracking that goes along with that. We can do that using workflows in SharePoint, and that's an option that some people choose. Some of our customers also just track them in either a dedicated case management system or in Access or in even just an Excel spreadsheet in order to make sure that they're meeting those timing obligations. And then the third part is normally a policy and training part where we just make sure that all those people who are involved in Freedom of Information requests, whether they be in the clerk or organizational or records group, or whether they're in the supporting groups, there's normally an officer who's responsible for freedom of information for each department, making sure that you have sufficient training there. From a system point of view, what we do is we just make sure that we can track all the documents that are related, that we have a place to store those and collaborate on them, so we're not duplicating the documents over and over again. We like to make sure that when people do a request, a search, that they're getting links to documents again rather than the documents themselves. So we're not creating multiple copies of those. Yeah, and make sure that we're following best practices, as well as linking that through to retention and disposition rules that are implemented either using SharePoint IAM policies or like a third-party add-in. Yeah, to make sure that we've got those aspects covered.
Great, thank you. One last question I see. Does the solution work with Office 365?
Yeah. So the solution works with any combination of SharePoint Online or SharePoint on premises. All the features that are available for SharePoint are surfaced through the Harmony interface, and you can work in with either or both. You can a hybrid mode. From the end users, where the actual site resides is completely transparent.
Great, thank you. Thank you, David and John. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. As I mentioned, you will receive an email with a link to view the recording of the webinar within a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thanks.